Looks like we've got a fair few people filing in. Everybody, thanks for joining. We're just going to hold off for a few minutes to let a few more people join before we get started. So thanks for coming. Just sit tight for a little bit. We'll get going soon. All right, well, hi, everybody. Thanks a lot for attending today's webinar with Veeam and Zadara. My name is Spencer Nakini. I'm on the marketing team here at Zadara, and I'm joined by Steve Costigan, who is Zadara's field CTO in the EMEA region, as well as Steve Firmus, who is a senior solutions architect with Veeam. So we're going to get started today with Steve Costigan offering an overview of the current state of ransomware risk, along with best practices of how to mitigate it, after which both of our hosts are just going to start taking turns, giving a look at how Veeam and Zadara each work with each other to help fulfill these best practices, keep our data safe, and most importantly, keep it quickly accessible. At the end, we'll save some time for questions. However, to ensure that we do have enough time, I'm going to hand over the reins to Steve Costigan so we can all get started.
Thanks, Spencer. So I think where we want to set the scene is, typically today, based on the Veeam ransomware report from earlier on this year, we're seeing that 85% of organizations have seen at least one ransomware attack. And interestingly enough, I've just received an email that states there was 441 ransomware attacks in July alone. That's slightly down from the record that was in May earlier on this year. But the interesting aspect is, some of the other figures that, have come out from that report. And Steve, an interesting aspect here is that only 16% are able to recover, even though they've paid, the ransomware. That's a very, very doubting number in terms of the impact to organizations. And also those that have paid, only 25% have got their data back. What is that saying in terms of the criticality of planning for actually preparing for an attack, not if it will happen, but when it will happen?
Yeah, and Steve, too, the thing is, like you said, the 25%, even though they paid, they never got it back, because like you said, these are criminals, right? So they've stolen the data, they've done stuff, and now they're, you're trusting them that if you pay, they'll give you the keys back to the data. It's like I said, it's very, very risky.
So I think that's also opening up to repeat attacks then as well, because you've paid once, they're going to keep coming, they're going to keep expecting that money, because as you say, they're criminals. They're looking for more and more money to extort from you in different ways. Now, interestingly, other aspects here is, again, from that same report, is the time to recover from these attacks. Now, if you look at most critical events that happen to a business, typically there'll be one or two systems that's taken offline. And with a ransomware attack, it's different because it's not like a power outage. It's not like, a failure of a component. This is something where somebody's actually gone into your environment and they've encrypted that data. And therefore, you've got to have a mechanism for being able to recover. Now, 3 weeks is a long time. How many organizations are going to be able to continue after having 3 weeks of loss of revenue, loss of being able to operate? What are we seeing from a Veeam perspective? Obviously, this report is aimed at highlighting to organizations that 3 weeks is a long time. What do we see from a Veeam perspective? Is this a growing trend? We're seeing organizations that are being more and more impacted, therefore, because of lack of planning, that this is extending beyond that 3 week data loss or recovery impact, enabling more critical, maybe even legal issues. If organizations are not able to operate, does that bring in other aspects and maybe they're not thinking about?
Well, you look at it, from the dawn of time with IT, right? The whole recovery model was to recover from, like you said, a failure, right? Or natural disaster, right? As we're speaking, there's a hurricane, whack in Florida. This is different in the fact that there's the identification, first of all, of what was attacked, right? Like you said, your hundreds of thousands of physical and virtual machines, what was impacted, and then to the point of recovering, it's the typical thing. Like you said, if you had, as you had your storage, and it was attacked, a lot of times now that storage is used as evidence, right? And forensically it has to be basically taken as evidence and used to identify how it was attacked, who the attacker was. So even you have the ability to recover, you need somewhere to recover the data too. And with supply chain issues and other factors, it could take a long time to identify what needs to be recovered and where to recover it to.
It's a great point. And it's one of the key points that we're going to cover in this session is not just can you recover, where are you going to recover to, and how. And that's really where we're going to take this in a slightly different way from this point. So, if we look at any organization, it's the worst thing you can do to them is take them offline. Now, as you've just mentioned, there's a hurricane blowing through Florida right now. That power outage may take them down for a few hours, but that ransomware attack taking you down for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 months is critically impacting to any organization. And really, at this point, we want to try and understand from the audience here where they see themselves from a protection of their data. What are you using today to protect your environment, your critical data? How are you ensuring that you're able to at least be able to recover? Are you using immutable object, immutable Linux repositories, offline tape, an immutable appliance, or are you not using any immutability at all? So I want to give you a chance to just think about those options and highlight which of those you're currently using, or if you're not using any of them, click that no immutability button down at the bottom. We'll just give a few more seconds to give people the option there to vote. And again, part of the reason behind this is to really just try and identify from our perspective, you know, the messaging that we're presenting here, how relevant that is to you as an organization. Okay, Spencer, I think maybe it's worthwhile closing the poll, and let's have a look at the results. Okay, so immutable object storage, you know, we're seeing 47%, so almost half. Linux repositories, 20%. Offline tape, still relevant for lots of organizations. Immutable appliance, quite low at 7%, but there. Wow, no immutability, a third. That's a huge figure that actually is what we're seeing out in the wild. You know, people are still not necessarily aware that, you know, it's the backup chain as much as anything else that is the target these days. And we're going to cover that in some of the things that we're going to discuss. So, you know, here's where we want to just try and focus in terms of understanding that cyber resilience. So I think the first thing that we want to really make you aware of is, what data can you afford not to lose? Have you actually looked at your data, where it is? Have you identified, can you lose it? Can you lose any of it? If so, how much of it can you lose to a ransomware attack or any other attack? Look at your protection mechanisms. How do you back up that mission critical data? What tools are you using? You know, is that a reputable set of tools? And then the next bit, which we see, you know, generally between, I think, us and Veeam and our partners, that a lot of people forget to understand, to detect where that data loss or data corruption potentially is going to come from. And it's going to be a major part of what me and Steve are going to talk about in terms of that detection as well as the protection. Then once you've done that, how are you going to respond to it? You know, how quickly can you do a restore? Okay, backups, you know, I think I've been in the industry long enough where all I hear is backup window, backup window, backup window. It's your restore window that's your critical part, because that's what's costing you money, especially if you're down in a ransomware attack. So then that recovery strategy, have you got a disaster recovery plan? Have you tested it? Is it current? Are you able to move forward with it? And I want to touch on some interesting aspects of, you know, really the stance that's being taken in the security industry, which is assume breach. Don't presume that you're never going to take a breach or that your systems cannot be breached, because the chances are, if it's connected to a network, it can be breached and it will be breached. And the NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Centre here in the UK, they've got some great design principles. And if you actually, you know, we'll provide a link later on to where to go and look at this data. But if you start to understand their principles and adopt those principles, first and foremost, look at the context before you design your systems. You know, are you able to attack your own systems or look for the weaknesses within your systems? Okay, and once you've done that, implement your designs accordingly. You know, multiple layers, not have a single flat network. Make a compromise more difficult, keep things patched, keep things up to date, make sure you've got, you know, least privileges set for key users. Then if something is attacked, if it is compromised, make sure that that disruption is difficult for it to spread east and west throughout your organization. And then make sure that you're able to, you know, detect any compromise. That means logging. Make sure that logging is off from the host, that you've got SIEM security, you know, devices in your network. And then, you know, what are you going to do to reduce the impact of a compromise? You know, these are all part of the security best practices that every organization now has to be looking at. You know, it's not just for the big organizations. Every organization, whether you're small, medium, or large, you know, is subject to these attacks. So the next part is assuming that you have been breached. You know, where is your data? You know, is it in multiple locations. If you've got some systems on premises, some with an IaaS provider, maybe a cloud provider, maybe some with a platform as a service provider, software as a service providers like Microsoft 365, Salesforce. Are you moving into running containers and Kubernetes? So these are all the different layers and all of the different data locations that you've got to provide a protection mechanism for. And I think this is one of the unique areas where Veeam provides answers to all of these. I think a combination of Veeam and Zadara answers all of these in some unique ways. And Steve, I'm going to hand over to you at this point in terms of Veeam data platform and really what's come with the Veeam 12 data platform and where things are heading.
Jesse, and this slide is again a perfect answer to the questions and points in your previous slides, because as you can see at the bottom, again, all of the different as a service or on-prem, physical, virtual, again, pretty much all of the options on your previous slide, you're correct. Veeam does have a solution working with Zadara to protect and recover that data. And as part of the recovery part, being ransomware or even, again, a natural disaster, we have, orchestration, right? The automation, the one-click recovery, if you will. But as you noted, very important is the monitoring and analytics, right? It's the ability to monitor your backups and the activity within, we have V1 and Enterprise Manager, which allow you to do this type of monitoring and analysis of the environment. So you can see things, abnormal backup times or abnormal backup amounts, which can indicate that something malicious may be going on, right? It's not going to definitively say, hey, there's a ransomware attack, but it'll give you an alert or a report as well that can allow you to do some of that proactive work. And as you mentioned, back in the day when I used to manage backups, management would always be hounding me that, what's today's backup success rate? It's like, does it really matter? Right? It's the recovery success rate that's really the critical part that you need to measure. And we do that using, our secure backup and other mechanisms within the Veeam product to allow you to do those on-demand ad hoc, restore tests. So again, the Veeam and Zadara combined, fulfill this, this data platform and all the requirements.
So interestingly, Steve, you mentioned the monitoring and Veeam One. It's a key part of what Veeam brings to the ecosystem that most backup vendors don't provide. I think most backup systems that I've worked with rely upon logs and somebody trawling through logs. How does Veeam give a different view from what you've mentioned there around Veeam One?
Well, we have some slides coming up that show. I mean, Veeam One is a state of the art. Reporting, alerts, alarms. It can be everything from what's being backed up, right? So again, we can connect and compare, let's say, your vCenter to Veeam's database. So if you have 1,000 VMs, and we can then go to Veeam, and Veeam One will compare and say, hey, look, of those 1,000 VMs, these 20 aren't being protected, right? Maybe they are new systems that were added that didn't go through the proper change control and get added to the Veeam. Or in the event of ransomware, maybe maybe an insider or an attack externally turned off the backup for that particular set of virtual machines. So Veeam One gives you that holistic view of your environment from, again, what is being backed up, what's not being backed up, the backup success rate. When you do restores, the what's being restored. It's just a very comprehensive reporting tool that is, built in with the product.
So interestingly, you mentioned that comprehensive reporting, and here we've got a slide that builds in terms of reporting that suspicious file size here from a backup perspective, and then Veeam1 giving those anomaly detections in terms of CPU, data store activity, and then those alarm settings. I mean, this is an interesting one because it's showing that the VSS service is being stopped on a VM here. Why is that an important alert to understand?
Well, that's one of the things. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things we're seeing lately, that the attackers are targeting are the snapshots, right? So within Windows, you have VSS running, creating its snapshots. Well, if you turn those off, now you don't have your restore points, right? So again, it goes hand in hand with if you had the alert saying that a backup was turned off, right? So you can have a backup that is backing up, Veeam is configured to back up those snapshots once an hour. Well, if you turn off the snapshotting, there's nothing for Veeam to protect. So even though your backups are 100% successful, there's nothing being backed up. And that's where, like you said, the previous example was showing, the anomalous, backup state, right? If you normally were backing up, if this log backup was backing up, a couple hundred gig every hour, and all of a sudden it was down to 0. That alert combined with this alert would not only notify you of what's going on, but it would actually help you identify what's going on.
So it's interesting. I mean, you look at a lot of the ransomware attacks that have started to happen. They're starting to target the backup vendors and the backup applications. And if people haven't secured their backup applications correctly, then it introduces other attack vectors. And I suppose this next one is aimed at us, I suppose, from a Zadara perspective. You're using an immutable object, and in this instance, obviously it's simulated, but these are some of the things that can happen, and Veeam1 can alert to, which is this change of the immutability window from 30 days down to 1 day. What's the impact of that? What's the impact of changing that and not doing anything about that?
Sure. So this is, one of the top questions I get asked is, okay, if Veeam was compromised itself, right? If someone got a hold of the credentials, you could actually get into Veeam and turn off immutability, right? What will happen? Well, that really probably shouldn't happen if you have everything secured properly, but as you said, you want to design it with the assumption that it will happen. So a couple things, you have this alert that as soon as someone made a change, bing, you get, you can get an email, you can get a text, both. Certainly all of your, SMT traps, you can get this notified. But the key thing is what happens. Well, if it goes undetected and if it goes uncorrected, anything that was previously backed up is still going to have its 30 days immutability. So no existing backups will be affected. What would be affected is something got backed up tonight would then have that 1 day object lock. So theoretically, if this went undetected for a few days, folks could then start deleting the newer backups. But again, with Veeam being secured properly, with the alerts in place, I'm not going to say it's preventable, but it's definitely detectable and actionable.
And that's the key aspect. It's about this holistic view, this defense of making sure that everything is in place and that you are doing that alerting. And again, here's an example of one of those alerts that, based on that previous change, you getting an email, you getting an SMS. It's important not to just ignore those and to actually action them and do something about it. And I think that's one of the critical parts, is that people get busy. It's easy to get overwhelmed with alerts, etc. But you've got to be looking at them, and you've got to do something about them. That's a critical part of this whole process. If we look at a combined capability here, of what Veeam and Zadara bring together, I think Zadara's got some unique qualities. We provide block, file, and object protection. We have separation from our VPSA perspective. So our VPSA is a virtual private storage array. We have immutability options for our object storage, and that integrates very well with Veeam. But we can also do network segregation. We support multiple VLANs, separation of virtual arrays, and combine that with multi-cloud protection that aligns very well to what Veeam is able to offer in terms of offering protection against multiple environments. Because I think in this day and age, people are moving data around. They're moving into a public cloud. They're moving out of public cloud. They're putting things back on premises. They're moving them back away to a different cloud. And therefore, having that flexibility brings in a real key aspect of what I think is one of Veeam's greatest assets, which is that portability, the backup portability and the ability to, be able to recover, from your backups without needing the actual backup appliance or whatever's been used to originally do the backup. And I think that's one of the key aspects of really what I think we bring together is enabling that portability.
Yeah, see this, the all four of those bullets are critical, but the first is something, as you said, it's very unique to Zadara, because we're always talk about the security and having multiple layers, right, to make it harder and harder for them. I always think back to some of the when you see the movies and stuff where they have to break into a safe, right, and they get through layer 1 and then they have to break through layer 2, and the longer that takes, the longer it can be detected and stopped. So in the Zadara example, you said, if you had block, file, and object, you could have, on the file, a hardened Linux repository, right? And then obviously with immutability on the object level. If someone was to, break into and come up with a way to crack into that, let's say the hardened Linux repository, that's a completely different set of tools and skills that they would need for the object storage. So, if you had, let's say, object storage for both, in Veeam's term, the performance tier and capacity tier, I'm not saying it's simple, but it would be a lot more difficult for them to do it if it was like a hardened Linux repository for the performance tier and an object storage for the capacity tier. So that's where, Zadara brings to the table a whole set of unique abilities and tools that make the Veeam solution that much better.
And just to emphasize, what we're saying there around this multi-tenant architecture, whether you're an enterprise organization or a service provider, the same rules apply. This ability to segregate, we can isolate all the way down to the disk. We pin CPU cores, we pin memory to those virtual controllers. This is a unique patented architecture that scales out. You can mix and match all flash environments with dedupe and compression. Encryption keys are held within each virtual controller pair that can be offset into a key MIP system. You can combine that with magnetic media, because while we'd all love for everything to be flash and high performant, sometimes the cost of doing that may prohibit, especially at large scale. And that's really where this combination of enabling flash options, we utilize Optane from that tier 0 perspective down to SSD, tiering down to magnetic or to object, enables that complete flexibility. And I think also, the location aspect, because we started attached to a hyperscaler or a number of hyperscalers. We've then enabled that same capability out into our service provider partners, but also on premises to enterprise customers. Everybody can take the same capabilities. We deliver one product set. And that means if you're combining Veeam across the top of that, you can make use of our block, make use of our file, make use of our object, and weave that into this whole multi-layered approach of ensuring that your data is protected. And if you are compromised, you've minimized the impact. Maybe it's one system. If you've got a system that's doing everything, block, file, and object, and there's no segregation, no separation, maybe if one's compromised, you've compromised the whole environment. And again, that's key in terms of thinking about the attack vectors. And moving on, you've got to then think about what is the recovery. Can you actually test your recovery? Are you able to recover? Where are you going to recover? Is that on premises? Is that a service provider? Is that a hyperscaler? And I want to touch on a couple of things that we bring into our product that really is quite unique. So we have this capability called remote clone. So, if we've got a basic infrastructure, running an application, could be a VM, could be Kubernetes, doesn't really matter. But we're providing a block or NAS capability to that. Then, data gets written, and then, we may want to replicate that to a different location. So we use snapshot-based replication. And then maybe our primary site gets compromised, but we've got a good snapshot in our recovery site. Then we have this ability with remote clone to project that volume back to the primary site and enable that then to be mounted back up. And that's an instant mount. So if the data's in the remote site, then projected back in, immediately available. We could be pulling just a file back, or we could be mounting the whole volume. And in the event that we can't use the primary site, as Steve alluded to earlier on, our primary site may be subject to forensic analysis, so therefore we can't use it. So in our recovery environment, we can do the same. We can just present that clone back up from that copy, and we can present multiple clones back up. And that's just part of that defense in depth mechanism of using multiple systems and the capabilities of multiple systems to complement each other. So additional to that, we have a object storage replication. Again, similar environment, the block NAS capabilities. The difference now is that the replication target is our object storage. We present a connection to that, and we then simply, again, replicate our snapshots to that object storage. This then allows any VPSA that is able to talk to that object storage to be able to pull that volume in and be able to instantly mount that back to another location. And again, this is one of those areas that, yes, it's good for DR, yes, it's good for ransomware mitigation, but it's also good for mobility as well. And it complements some of the things that Veeam have got in their armory around instant recovery, etc. And really that sort of brings on into really where Veeam builds on top of what Zadara's capabilities are, because I think we're able to help organizations with the 3-2-1 aspect, but I think Veeam goes that extra way with the 3-2-1-1-0. And Steve, I'm going to hand over to you if you want to explain the 3-2-1-1-0 aspect here.
Absolutely. And again, this again is a great example of where Zadara provides some feature functionality that others do not. Like you said, the 3 copies, right? So obviously you have your production copy, but then at least 2 for recovery purposes. Now the 2 for 2 different media, that's where again we talked about sure, if it's media, I mean that's where you can say disk versus tape, but even if it's still disk, you can talk about different formats, as in the block, file, and object. But also this is where Steve was saying you can have a VPSA, right, for 1 copy and another VPSA for a 2nd copy. Different networks, all different authentication methods. So in essence, 2 different types of media. One being the offsite copy. And again, Steve just explained, multiple ways to have, Zadara copying the data to remote locations. Offline air gapped, immutable. That's, where one, being tape, right? Tape, pull it out of the data center, stick it in a box and, bury it somewhere. It's not going to get attacked, right? It's completely offline. But the immutability is where, Zadara comes into play again with the S3 object locking, as well as, presenting it as a target, or not target, a source for our hardened Linux repository. In the 0, right? That is the critical one of all of these numbers, is you need to be able to recover, right? Going through all these other steps really is worthless if you can't restore the data, right? Because of errors. And that's where Veeam comes in. And Steve, again, in his previous slide, showed where you can take these, replicas and go to different sites, different VPSAs, then use Veeam with our, our data labs and our Sure, backup, and going through and doing some ad hoc verifications to make sure that, the data that you have on, these different media types and different VPSAs is actually recoverable. So, again, the 32110, follow this as a, guideline for your design of your recovery solution. But, again, Zadara fits pretty much across the line.
So interesting, Steve. You mentioned a number of different things there. Obviously, immutability, object, tape, worm snapshots are another option. CDP replication, obviously depending upon the capabilities. Hardened Linux repositories, we're seeing lots of organizations look at that as an option since Veeam introduced that in. And then obviously, we do a lot with service providers. Cloud Connect and Insider Protection provides additional capabilities that I think, is pretty unique to Veeam in terms of having that flexibility of, protecting your backups, but then sort of outsourcing part of it so that you've got a demarcation point. If you look at a lot of ransomware attacks, they'll attack one site for them to attack the supply chain of the Cloud Connect, environment as well, and get past the insider protection. That's multiple layers that they've got to get beyond. So I think, this is where I think Veeam offers a number of different options to organizations to really think about their data and data protection environments. But I think, we talked about recovery, and, I think, you've got some key aspects here around recovery options. And again, Steve, do you want to talk through them? Because I think, again, they're pretty unique from your perspective in terms of, you're the only organization that can do all of this from all of your standard licensing. It's not an additional bolt-on as per se.
Exactly. And like I said, I think we've talked about all these in different variations. Absolutely. We can use like our CDP to make copies of your hypervisors between sites, right? So if one site was, again, a natural disaster, or again, if it was a target and victim of a ransomware attack, as you said, you could close off that infected hypervisor environment and, do your forensics or, other actions. And as soon as it's immediately failed over, you have your DR copy up and running, right? And, if you have to rebuild the primary site, you can do things where, new writes go to the primary hypervisor, and, over time you can restore the data, again, using Zadara in both locations, both as your source data and your backup protection. Upper right hand, you have your snapshot integration where, we create, when we do our backups, we can, and Steve mentioned, the VSS, we can actually restore directly off of snapshots, restore the actual snapshot itself. The multiple cloud providers, we have ability to protect native workloads on all of the major providers, as well as have them be, targets for the initial backup, targets for a secondary backup. You can do cross-cloud backups. The list is nearly endless. And last but not least, right, we have our instant recovery, right? So Steve has the example of instant recovery of virtual machines, but we can do instant recovery of databases. We can do instant recovery of file systems. So again, this is where one of the first slides Steve had, showing, hey, you need to identify what data that you cannot live without. That's where you would look at, having the snapshot based, having instant VM recovery, right? Having those multiple clouds, and then design your solution, backwards, right? So from the most important to the least important, and probably use all four of these for the most mission critical, and maybe select one for the least important.
So you mentioned instant recovery. We're going to pop into another poll, Steve, because this is a key part of really, I think, where we're trying to get people to think about, which is it's okay doing your backups, but how often do you test your backups recoverable? And I see this as a critical element for a lot of organizations. In previous webinars I've done, I've talked about Schrodinger's cat. Unless you open the box, you don't know whether the cat's alive or dead. And backups are akin to that. Interesting to see from the audience here, how often do you test your backups are recoverable?
And are they the real backups, right? Again, I remember doing those. Once a year or twice a year, going off to a disaster recovery site. And I remember we used to do special backups just for the disaster recovery, right? And those don't really count.
Yeah. So it's an interesting area because I'm always conscious about that recovery process. How confident are you? Could you sign to your compliance auditor, to your CFO, your CEO that you've done your job, you've tested it, and you can get your company back up and running? So give it a few more seconds, and then we'll see what the poll results are. Okay, Spencer, let's have a look. Wow, 30% never test their backups. 6% daily, 6% weekly, 24% monthly, 24% quarterly, 12% monthly or yearly. Okay, so really interesting spread there. For organizations who never really think about testing their recovery, maybe that's an area that it's worthwhile thinking about how you can do that and why that's important. So I'm just gonna frozen. Okay, so I want to touch on automatic recovery because I think this is a key aspect of what really Veeam brings to the party here. And when you're looking at automatic recovery verification, Steve talked about sure backup and the ability to be able to go through your planning and recovery verification. And it's really about this recovery verification. Are you ensuring that what you're backing up you can recover from? Has there been a threat detected? And where does Zadara play in terms of this? We underpin from a VPSA perspective, from an immutable object perspective, and we can also underpin that recovery environment and even the primary environment to that ESX environment because we've got that separation. But I think there's another aspect here. If you've got to do lots of recoveries, you're going to push this through Veeam proxies and mount servers, and you've got to cache that data. You've got to be able to put that data somewhere. So you can present VPSA data up to those mount proxies and use that from a caching perspective while you're going through that recovery mechanism. So be aware of that flexibility that we can combine, and everything that we do is API driven. So you can automate a number of these things, and I think that's the key aspect of really what Veeam brings is that automation, Steve. I think it's that recovery verification automation that is a key part of this, because manually having somebody doing all of these steps day in, day out, that's time consuming. And you see why maybe some of those organizations don't test their recovery mechanism.
And see, that's also
So,
a good way. I'm sorry, not
sorry.
saying that. No, that's fine. I was just gonna say also that's a great way to identify, because the thing with ransomware attack is you don't know when you were attacked, right? So, because a lot of these attacks, the code, malicious code will hang out in your environment for days, weeks, months before it's actually activated. So this is also a way to go through, as you said, that previous screen showed, hey, I'm doing my secure restore. Oops, there's a virus in there, or this is, the detection. So you could actually keep going through the restores till you find the clean one. If that was the way you want to do it.
So interestingly, that brings us right into this point, which is exactly as you're saying around the secure restore, and actually scanning during that restore process. Is there an infection? What do you want to do? Do you want to stop the restore? Do you want to isolate it? And I think again, you've got good integration here with other third-party products, malware products, antivirus products. And again, from our perspective, we can underpin this from a storage aspect. The next bit that I want to touch on is the ransomware recovery process, because typically this isn't a 9 to 5 job for the ransomware operators. They're typically looking for the weakest point in your organization. And I hate to say it, you've got one coming up, you've got Labor Day coming up, you've got that long weekend in the US, and typically for US organizations, that will be a threat vector, just as we've just had one this week in the UK, which was our late summer bank holiday. And really what happens here is you're under attack. Okay, have you determined your scope? Do you know how you're going to recover? Have you got an incident response plan? Do you know the team? Do you need to involve law enforcement? Because bear in mind, this is a crime. Okay, have you got cyber insurance? Do you need to invoke their incident response team? How are you going to do that? Have you got this perfectly documented in a way that you can act? And then the hard work begins. Okay, forensic analysis in terms of the chain of evidence. You may find all of your infrastructure is impounded and you can't use it. So have you got a secure sandbox? Have you got a way of doing things in a manner that helps you get back up and running? This is where a recovery environment, a clean environment, could be a colo, could be an MSP, could be cloud. Okay, but you've got to do this in conjunction with forensic analysis. And another important aspect of this is it's a crime scene. So you don't want to be destroying evidence. So therefore, just overwriting your existing environment may not be valid. You may just find that it's impounded because of this. So again, key areas to think about. So I want to touch on how we view it from inside the Zadara world. So you're running your backup, you're running to Veeam. We've got our VPSAs. You may have a remote environment, and you're going to back that up to an offsite sober environment, and that then gives you the ability to use that offsite environment. Maybe you've got some compute there to run a sure backup recovery and actually test that you can recover your environment. So this is one option. Another option, is because it's delivering that 3 data copies, 2 different media, 1 offsite, at least 1 immutable. Here we've got 2 immutable if we're using our on-premises direct-to-object capability that Veeam is enabled in V12. And then testing that recovery, we show backup. It's adhering to that 32110 rule. And again, it's about aligning that from multiple levels of defense, because hopefully these are all sat on different networks. You've secured the environment. The VPSAs are secured with, multi-factor authentication. You're using key MIP systems for encryption keys, etc. So all of the good things that we provide, and all of the good things that Veeam provide. And then, another alternative is along the same lines, taking that infrastructure, but pushing this off to a Veeam VCSP, where everything's behind their infrastructure. They're owning this, they're controlling this, but again, it's going off to a sober environment from a Zadara perspective. The difference here is the short backup recovery is going to be tested on your primary site, but again, we're at that 3, 2, 1, 1, 0 capability. And then moving that forward to the CDP piece that we mentioned earlier on. Again, same level from an infrastructure perspective. Difference being now is that from a CDP perspective, that's coming to maybe an all-flash array. You may be implementing object storage from the VCSP and creating a sober environment that's giving you, a 32110. Or you may be offloading your backups to the VCSP and using their sober and using our multi-tenant capabilities from our object storage. And again, maybe then utilizing our automated snapshot policies to provide an extra level around that CDP. Again, using sure backups from a recovery on your primary site perspective. And again, 3 copies, 2 different media, 1 offsite, at least 1 immutable, test your recovery. And also, if you're using a VCSP that's doing DR as a service capabilities, then you can fail over to their environment and run your environment in there. So again, it's just those different levels and enabling all of those capabilities. So moving on, I'm conscious of the time, Stephen. We've got around about 3 or 4 slides to get through. Zadara and Veeam together provide this total confidence, the immutability at every layer. Whether you're going to use Zadara's VPSAs to underpin connectivity to a physical head that's running as a Linux repository, or whether you're going to use our object immutability on premises, that direct to object model, and then utilizing that as an offsite capability, maybe through a service provider, just gives you multiple insights into how your data is protected. And again, it's this secure approach, multiple layers, enable fast recovery. It's not the backup window that's important, it's your recovery options, especially for ransomware. But enable that mobility, because without the mobility, you may not be able to recover to an alternative location. If you've got to recover back to the backup appliance that's on site and your environment's down and impounded, you're not going to be able to do much. So having that flexibility is key in this as well. Comprehensive monitoring, I can't stress this enough. If you don't know what's going on in your environment, then you need to look at that, and you need to look at how you can secure that. Make sure you've got SIEM monitoring as well into your infrastructure, because that east-west look aside that's happening from a ransomware perspective is a key part of their long-term approach. And then make sure you can recover your backups, and you're doing that automatic recovery verification. So bringing all of this together, 10-step plan. Assume you've been breached. Okay, make sure that you've got autonomous backup files. You can recover them anywhere, not just back to the original location. Make sure you're implementing the data zip code protection at 32110. Trusted immutability. We've seen organizations that have just put up an open source S3 bucket with immutability, but they stick it in an environment where they've got root access. If you've got root access, chances are the ransomware hackers have got root access, could be compromised. Just think about that as an alternative. So that's where that zero access backups is critical. You can't delete them. And then make sure you're encrypting at rest and in flight. Encrypt your backups, especially the offsite ones. because the ransomware guys, they're going to be looking for ways of recovering your data so that they can exfiltrate it. It's not just about encrypting, it's about exfiltrating as well. So secure your access, make sure that only authorized people have got access. Use multi-factor and see all, know all. Use that monitoring capability from all of your devices wherever possible. And then design for recovery, make sure that you know where you're going to recover, how you're going to recover, and then use secure restore to ensure that what you're recovering is not the same ransomware back. And hopefully then you can achieve your goals. Some resources, we'll make the slides available to anybody who wants them. VBR alerts, Veeam best practice guides, Veeam EMEA best practice from the EMEA essays. I use that a lot. Zadara guides and API documentation, the NCSC design principles, and anybody who's interested in understanding more around cybersecurity, the ISC2 has got some free certification running around certified cybersecurity at the moment. They're offering 1 million free places. Sign up, go and enhance your capabilities. You'll gain a lot from it. I certainly did. So reaching over some Q&A. Any questions? Spencer, is there anything that springs to mind?
Yes, it looks like we've had one question so far. Matthew Gare asked, what hardware does Zadara use for on-prem solutions? And does Zadara manufacture hardware ourselves?
So we don't manufacture the hardware. We take standard Intel architecture hardware and we create a software-defined architecture over the top. So what we have is a patented architecture. But again, that helps in terms of that software-defined scale out, dynamically composable infrastructure. It's a key part of what we do. Drives and CPUs can belong to a block array. One day they could belong to a NAS array for a different use case further down the line, and then ultimately you move your application across to maybe using object storage. You can tear that down dynamically and then reutilize them as part of the object storage. So all of that flexibility is there, but also combined with the security of multi-factor, different roles, different responsibilities. So yeah, we're not tied to us manufacturing our own hardware in that way.
So Steve, we got another one from Matt. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, reach out to me, Matt.
Yeah, so it says, no need to read this out loud, but I'm curious to see if Zadara software will run on our soft iron hypercloud platform, made in US cloud platform. We are a Veeam Tech Alliance partner as well.
Yeah, I think we do things similar but different. It's something we can always talk about. So yeah. Okay. So outside of that, if there's no other questions that we've got, I will bid everybody a thank you. Thank you for your time. I know we've run over a little bit here, but I think there was a lot of things that we wanted to get across, and it's quite a complex subject, and hopefully you've begun to understand really the value of what Zadara and Veeam bring together. Interesting one. So why do I think people don't test and recover backups on a regular basis? Because they find it time consuming and it's generally a manual process, and people view backups as an insurance policy that maybe they'll hope they'll never need to invoke. I think those times have gone. It's an essential part of running your business now. And if you don't know that you can recover, then you probably won't get cybersecurity insurance. And if you can, your premiums will be extremely high. You're putting your business at risk. And you need to be able to report that up to your C-level execs to say, we're putting you at risk. And I don't know what many organizations will say, yeah, that's acceptable.
And Steve, a lot of tools, backup products, don't have easy ways to do that like Veeam does. So that's another reason that we see it, right? Because if, Veeam does it within our data labs and, but other products, you literally have to restore it somewhere and then run the application where, Veeam, you don't require that. So it could also be what product they're using for their backups prevents them from doing these type of tests.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. And, I remember three and a bit years ago when we first started with the Zadara Veeam and immutability piece, and that whole data labs piece was a real critical part of where we started. And it's funny that we're 3 years on, and yet there's really still only Veeam that operates in that way, and is certainly the leader in being able to restore into a secure environment, run that antivirus capability, and just do things in a way that I think makes it easier for organizations to test their standpoint. We got another one. Can I expand on cyber insurance savings if the backups are tested? I think it's not just around backups being tested, it's about proving your posture. Do you have a documented posture that ensures you have immutability, that you have a proper cyber resilience environment? It's more than just backup. And I think that's really where Zadara and Veeam bring lots of capabilities jointly together, because insurance premiums, if anybody's watched them, they've gone up incredibly high across the last 2 years because the number of attacks is growing. I mentioned earlier on, July saw 441 reported ransomware attacks. A lot of it based on the Move IT piece that hit the streets a few months back. May was the highest on record. So we're in an environment where this is increasing. We'd like to think that all of the security posturing, all of the advice that people are getting, that this would be getting easier. It's not. It's getting harder. So therefore, actually building a secure multi-layered environment is more critical. Okay, right. I think we're done. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and thanks for staying with us.
Yeah, and Steve, thanks a lot for taking us through this. Again, everybody else, thank you for attending. We hope we're able to give you a good view of how Zadara and Veeam work together today, and that we've been able to answer all of your questions. That being said, we will be making this webinar available on demand shortly via email, along with a link to speak directly with one of our cloud specialists. So if you'd like to get a bit more detailed information about something you heard today, please use that link to schedule a bit more time to learn. But other than that, thanks again for coming to the webinar. Hope everybody enjoys the rest of your week, and for everybody in the US, have a fantastic holiday weekend. So once again, Steve, thank you very much. And everyone else, thanks for attending.
Thanks all.
Yep, thanks everyone.